Robert Bradshaw is one of the most operationally decorated and spiritually tested chaplains in modern American history. Over a 20-year career spanning the most elite and sensitive commands in the United States Armed Forces, from SEAL Team 6, DevGru, to the White House Military Office, Bradshaw served not as a peripheral support figure, but as the frontline architect of human resilience. He has ministered at the intersection of extreme violence, institutional power, and profound grief. He now operates as a civilian chaplain, retreat facilitator, and spiritual advisor for the NSW, Naval Special Warfare Community, and Gold Star families. He represents a rare convergence, a man who has lived inside the fire operationally, spiritually, and psychologically, and emerged with a coherent, battle-tested philosophy of human worth. Not a theorist, a practitioner with a body count of grief and a record of repair. Robert Bradshaw, aka Chaps. Robert, who are you? Who have you been? And most importantly, who are you becoming?
So that's actually one of my soapboxes. If anyone has a soapbox, is an identity question. So who am I, as an identity question? And so I'm a child of the Most High King, a Christ follower, one his disciple, and that started early for me in life. And I would say the who I was and who I'm becoming is part of that entire journey. And it's still a journey. I've not arrived, nor will I, until either the Lord returns or calls me home. And so that's who I would say I am, and that's where I'm at.
Robert, Gallup identifies how you're hardwired. It presents 5 attributes, and I would appreciate one sentence, that which surprised you most when you saw this written on paper. Your 5 salient attributes are 1, belief, 2, woo, 3, connectedness, 4, arranger, and 5, positivity.
So I think the one that surprised me the most is because I didn't understand it was woo. The others made sense. I'm very relationally wired. I like to connect people. I like to call forth what's there as you see it, their gifts, talents, and abilities. And so woo did not make sense to me. And so I had to look it up. And then it reminded me of a time, and this just came to memory when I thought about woo, is we were at Joint Special Operation University being briefed with the guest speaker. I think it was like the true life Donnie Brasco or something, like Crime Boss. And he just stops, and I'm sitting up front. He just stops in the middle and just like stares at me. And I was like, what? And he's like, I know I'm going to say this wrong. I don't know how to say it, but you just have a welcoming face. And I was like, well, I've never heard that before. But I think what it means is, at least for my understanding, is people that get to spend a little time with me or in the presence will know that I actually really care. And then I'm interested in who they are and where they're at, without an agenda. And if a relationship blossoms from that, then it can go where it goes. But it's just being able to be present and being received.
WOO stands for win others over, and I had to look that up as well. I thought you had come up with your own vernacular. Super cool context. I appreciate that. And as a linguist, words matter. And so the way that presented itself was very impactful for me. Speaking of words, one of my favorite authors, it's got to be Mark Twain. He made a comment that I saw on your LinkedIn page, which is paraphrasing, 2 of the most important days of your life are when you were born and the day you understood why. So, Robert, when did you find out your why?
Again, that's a journey thing, and I actually fought it for a while. I don't know if others bargain with God, but I tried that route. It doesn't work, but it delays. But I was a teacher and a coach at a public school and doing youth ministry for free, and I'm like, hey, we got this. This is good. We're doing we're doing ministry, and God, I knew God was calling me into more of a full-time ministry. And when I finally quit fighting, it just made sense. And all the things that led up to that point, and then where I was going, made sense. So that's when I found out my purpose. And I used to use that quote almost in every brief. I created an ethics brief when I was out at the training center for NSW, but also in suicide prevention, because that first day is important too. You were born and you matter. And then the second day is when the light bulb goes on, and then you are free and comfortable in who you are and what you've been created to do.
In preparation for this call together, I spoke with some people in your orbit, and I would have expected no other answer but that. There's a few attributes that were left out that I'd love to share with you. You've been described as an empath to me. You've been described as one that is constantly present, and most importantly, in my opinion, consistently the same way. So I appreciate that, and it's always a pleasure to be able to push that forward as it comes from people that know you the deepest.
Thank you.
Sir, I'd like to get into the craft of chaplaincy. Can you help us understand the difference between a pastor, a priest, and a military chaplain in combat, and not the textbook answer, the one that you've learned in field, in theater?
So first, some of that title part is based off of a denominational hierarchy, or how church polity might be. Because I believe a chaplain is also a pastor, and for those who use the title priest, we actually had those. They were a chaplain and a priest. Interesting you should ask that. I think the chaplain has to open up and embrace the entire culture. And I don't mean in an acceptance way, but in an understanding way, in order to maneuver and be real and make a difference in that, because you're embedded. And I think a pastor or a priest kind of title rolls into that, but is very different, because in a church context, you're interacting, but it can be cleaned up before you arrive. Where in an embedded combat theater, if you 7-month deployment or however long, you're with each other 24/7. So there's not a lot of fake or pretend. And so I loved that real genuineness of finding out who people really were. And I'm sure they watched me, and both in my good days and my bad days, and how I responded from my good days and bad days in an embedded aspect. So I think that is one of the bigger things. Maybe an old town type of priest that roams around in the community can make an impact like a chaplain can, because, like, say there's a workplace issue. Well, we work with the leaders, we're advisors, and we might be able to help that out, mitigate it. Where when I was pastoring, I don't ever recall someone coming to me and saying, "Hey, can you come talk to my boss?" Because there was no relational piece. We're already with that. So I think that's one of the bigger differences of just really being able to thrive for others in the context of the military, and especially in a combat context.
Speaking of embedding, are the spiritual needs of a SEAL operator more intense, more conflicted, or different than anyone else you have served?
It's almost like a diamond. You look at different facets of how to answer that question. In a nutshell, I don't believe they're different, because I believe everyone's spiritual needs are the same. In one aspect, first is that need to surrender in that faith. The context creates different issues and different hurdles or things. So in my time with especially the operational force at DevGru, they're just gone all the time. They're deployed all the time. And so the time to come back and to have some downtime, I forget what the military used to call it. There's actually a term, dwell time is just totally different than a large conventional unit. And even some of those don't get the unit, uh, the dwell time they're supposed to get. So then that creates a different issue that may be compounded. So it looks from the outside like someone may say, they just need it more. It's just different. And so you learn to live within the life rhythms of that unit, especially if you have multiple deploying units within a command. I'd have some friends and they talked about the pre-deployment, mid-deployment, post-deployment. I was like, I live in all three of those all the time. We always have someone gone, someone leaving, someone coming back. And so that is a little bit of the difference. But spiritual needs across the whole, I believe every human is equal dignity and equal worth, and they're going to worship something and until they find day two.
Well said. Spiritual needs. You were present for the single largest loss of life in naval special warfare history. I don't need you to break any confidence, but I would like to know specifically what happened and what that did to you as a man of faith.
Yeah, that was a bad day. That was August 6, 2011, and one of our troops was on a helicopter, and it was shot down in Afghanistan, and all of our guys, our attachments, and the flight crew, and 8 Afghan partners and a military working dog all perished at the same time. And so that was not easy to hear. I do remember getting the list. I happened to be stateside at the time. I delayed my time by a week to go out there because it was my in-laws' 50th wedding anniversary, or I would have been downrange. Not in danger. I would have never been on the helicopter. And I was where I was supposed to be, as you look at it, to take care of all the families in the command and everything that was getting ready to happen. That's where the 40-something thousand flight miles in the next couple of months went, including 2 trips to Afghanistan. So it was a hard time. I had lots of support. I think I counted at some point 25 other chaplains, chaplain assistants, religious program specialists from the Army, of course, the Navy, and then even the Air Force. And I don't mean even as in a slight, but just adding them. All had their hands in supporting that effort across the globe and in so many different ways. And what did it do to me as a man of faith? Overall, it strengthened me. It took me to my knees immediately. I was like, there's just no way anybody can handle this. And the support came in right away from the 2 senior Army chaplains that I worked the most with. And they both did the same exact thing. They said, let me pray for you, and what do you need? In that order. I don't know if they're trained that way, but it was a blessing. And we just started working. And until we had completed all of the funerals and all of that support, and then it carried on after that. But it kind of breaks you, but then rebuilds you in a stronger way, faith-wise. Unless you believe that bad things aren't supposed to happen, then that's another world. I'm not in that world.
I don't know many that are, but I do appreciate that. Curious, you spend this time carrying the grief of others as a professional function. You comfort, you present them hope, you show them a way forward. Who takes care of you?
Well, so first of all is my faith. So, when I said it took me to my knees, that was not figuratively, that was literally. I went to my office and just went to my knees and bawled. And then got right up and went to work. And so then you have your faith. I have a wonderful wife who's been through everything. And she knew a lot of these guys really well. We just had a barbecue with them all. And we're invited to that. Met the families. So a lot of these extended families, even some moms and dads, I'd met, again, who knew that was planning for a natural kind of connection later? But I met at that barbecue, and then there are some that come through your path, both religious program specialists. I mentioned that once, but I'll use the term RP after that. That's how we do that. They're our teammates. And I had an amazing one there. One came over with group 4 with an amazing chaplain that just walked pretty much through everything with me. And we still are in touch today. He's still active duty. And then caring for those families, I was honoring my falling. So I looked at it, and I still do. I spent a weekend with the Gold Star family in April, and I looked at that as honoring the guys that I lost. And so, yeah, it's not something you forget. And even with Memorial Day just happening, for those who lose people in combat, family members especially, and then those caregivers that come alongside, and I've lost upward of over 60, and most in combat. I lost a lot of Marines in the deployment as well. The Memorial Day is every day. It's when it interrupts your day. You can just be driving along and have a memory. And what do? You honor them in that memory, and you spend a little time there. And maybe you send a note or a text or an email to their loved one just to let them know they're not forgotten.
That's a burden and a blessing to carry at the same time. Can't imagine the gravity and the weight of 60, not to mention one. One's enough, too many. 60 is, in my mind's eye, trauma beyond imagination. So I do appreciate that. Robert, switching gears for a moment, you were in the White House office through COVID, through the death of George Floyd, a contested election, and a presidential transition. What does stabilizing actually mean at the top of the pressure system?
Whew. Yeah, so that was a tour. That was a tough one, and mainly because of all the things you mentioned. And I had 4 different bosses over 3 years, and then one was added to the burden. So what stabilizes at the top? One, it's another unit, the White House Military Office, that screens. So it's a blessing to have been screened twice, and you're with people. Projection from the outside sometimes, and that's a leadership aspect that maybe we could unpack another day about leadership and projection, is that when you're in these special units, you think you're special. When most of the people in those special units don't even think that. But they really love what they do. I think it's full of people who know day 2, now that you've mentioned that. So I can put that together. So they understand the mission, and they love being part of the team. And so the stabilizing piece is still the people, no matter what came our way. And it was a lot. And so you add those things to it. It's not like you say the strong survive. It's the connected will survive. As a collective whole, you stay the course. You know what the mission is. There's a reason we're there. Everyone else thinks it's about ceremonies and stuff, but it's very interesting. No matter what unit it is, it's really the dynamic of the human beings that make it up.
So here's the question: the connected in a White House that's a political system.
Yes.
And yet you maintained and describe yourself as apolitical in that role. So I'm curious how you serve a system without being captured by it.
Well, that's beautiful. And I'm glad you asked that question, because hopefully this helps all the people who still serve there. Not that they need it, but others need to see this in them. So the White House Military Office is probably the most apolitical place I ever served, because you're so close to all the political that's not our role as the military. So that there is a dividing line on the aspects of political versus mission. So we were there for a specific mission, and it happened to tie in the operational commands that fall under White House Military Office. And any of your listeners can go to Wikipedia and learn the whole framework. But that was the beauty of it. And I think for me, who quit watching news in 2005, I didn't even know who the political people were. You know, the higher people, yes. I mean, I knew who the president was and the vice president, but I would be on an elevator with someone in a cabinet, and I'm talking to them just like we're talking. And I knew they rode a bike, and I'm like, "How was your bike ride today?" And I think they really appreciated that I just treated them like a human being, and that we never kind of meshed into it. Oh, unbelievable professionals from that aspect. I would say for the majority. I mean, you know, there's always a one-off, but at Whammo, the overwhelming majority are there for the right reason, and they're there for the mission, and it doesn't bleed into other shiny objects or opportunities. And I still call it the most difficult tour I had. Everyone might think it was DevGru. That one, it taught me my last really big lesson. Well, my overarching lessons when I looked back on a military career, that people cannot mess with you unless God allows it. Because I worked for a very hard boss for a little while, and I literally, he would get rid of people, and I thought it was my turn, because I did speak truth to power. That's how I was trained. That's what I was called to do. And but they kept me around, and the rest of the folks, I mean, he increased my workload because now I'm taking care of other wounded people. But yeah, some amazing people there, and I know some that are still there, and they just do it quietly, and that's the way it should be done, and not anyone projecting their thoughts or biases onto what they don't know. That's like a bad pastor preaching from the absence of scripture, filling things in that aren't there.
Wow. That's improv for sure, and not in a good way. Yes. Thinking about what you shared, working in the White House, remaining apolitical and yet present for all, brings me back to a comment you made during our intake call about land navigation and your analogy of it. My takeaway was, as you shared with me, that if you start off course by a few degrees at the beginning, your end destination is nowhere near where you intended. And it's clear to me that you apply that to your spirituality. Can you share a story of what it means for the operators you served with?
Absolutely. And I'll share it through the leadership. I was sitting in Afghanistan with one of the troop commanders, so that'd be like a platoon commander. And we got on this subject somehow, and he's like, chaps, I don't worry about the guy. And we'll use the word guy because at that point, that's what we had. Operators were all male. And he said, I don't have to worry about the guy who has a foundation, because when he's off, he knows how to get back. And that was that compass aspect that we were talking about. Someone who doesn't have something I call it a North Star or a central point or a foundation to get back to, when they're off, they're on a long walk off into nowhere. And that really comes to land nav when you're learning land nav and you're trying to find points. If you're off a few degrees when you start, you're not off the trail very far. But if you continue, you're way off. And how do you get back? That becomes a hard life lesson. And I think they both apply. It's a hard lesson in a class, but in real life, it's a hard lesson as well if we get way off track in our compass.
That's something I haven't forgotten since our first call. I can experience it visually. I can experience it intellectually and emotionally, off point, off center, a little bit off. Then you're a lot off at the destination. And I recognize you as one that's about the journey as well as the destination. So that analogy really resonated with me quite loudly.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also said something during our intake call that has been on my mind since, and it was more of a statement. You said, "Long live the brotherhood." And I'm curious what that actually means, and not the bumper sticker version, the version that you've lived.
Wow. So what I live versus what maybe someone else does. So long live the brotherhood is a statement. It's interesting. We just had Memorial Day, and down at the National Navy UDT SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce, they welcomed in a partner unit, 160th SOAR, and they read out 107 names of their lost and put bricks down into the sidewalk. And the speaker, who I've known for a long time, the guest speaker from 160th, he was like, the SEALs have almost always said, "Long live the brotherhood." He said, but other special units within SOCOM say the same thing. And then he said, "Long live the brotherhood." And I think that is the fact that for them, it may mean that it continues, and then we honor. If we lose you, we honor that. For me, for a while I used to say it at the end of a prayer, because for me that's an eternal aspect as well. So I never look at prayer as humor or trying to impress. I looked at all my prayers at ceremonies, retirements, graduations as really moments where I'm ushering those I'm praying for to the very throne of grace of God. And so when I say "Long live the brotherhood," I'm actually praying for their eternal state, that they may come to know. And in fact, there was a 2-star admiral at the time, was at Warcom, and he told my supervisor, chaplain, goes, "I don't like when he does that," and he didn't understand it at all. And so when my supervisor told me that, I was like, if he doesn't understand the context from which I come from, and he thinks it's only about the brothers in the brotherhood that actually have earned that trident, then I can see where he's coming from. But at the same time, other leaders are like, "I love when you do that," because you're ushering something bigger than what we're talking about today. So for a while I chose to, God knows my heart, I'd still close a prayer, and I kind of tied that off, and then I went, "Oh, we have a new admiral, I'll put it back in."
That's nice. And it's interesting because for me, the word capacity comes up. Anyone that's going to say they don't like something in my worldview lacks a capacity or a curiosity to understand why. So I
Wow.
struggle with that.
Yeah. So you bring up one of my biggest leadership pet peeves. I believe outstanding leaders know how to ask a question
Amen.
instead of making a statement, especially if there's a misunderstanding or a capacity issue. Like, just take that one for example. The question could have easily been, "Why does he end like that?" And then I knew him. He could have literally just asked me. And I would have been able to say that. I don't know, it would have changed his perspective, but he would have understood. And I think that's the biggest thing when you talk about leadership. I remember when people go way out of their way to complain about someone I supervised, I would take it, I would listen, and at the end, before they left, I would say, "Can I ask you a question? Do you take this much effort to go out of the way when someone does an outstanding job to get to their supervisor to pay the compliment forward for such an outstanding job?" 90% of the time, the person said no. Then I realized they have a negative lens. They like to police, and they like to see mistakes, and therefore they live their life that way. And so, yeah, it taught me a lot just by asking them a further question.
And is that the majority of people in our world?
I think when you're in a hierarchy, power type place where rank is involved and titles. Now, as a chaplain, I always thought we have rank to help people, and if we ever forget that, then we've got off on our compass. We're off a bunch of degrees. So I see the need for all that, but I think it's being comfortable with who you are. Some of the best leaders I worked with never had to tell anyone they were the smartest person in the room, even though they might have been. The difference is a leader who is super smart, who's not a narcissist, wants to be in a room that elevates, not just themselves, but everyone in the room, and whatever that does to the organization or the mission. Now, you take a narcissist, intelligent person, they want to remain the smartest person in the room, no matter what. So if you get stuck with one of those leaders, you almost have to learn to be adept at any good idea. You have to get it to them so they think it's theirs, so that you can actually make good for the unit. It's a very hard place. But I just think that being exposed to such great leaders across my time in the military, I literally, direct leader, I can literally think of only one that wasn't. And that's a blessed trip, a journey. And the fact is, and some of those leaders were so smart, but they made everyone better, and everyone wanted to be there. It was just a beautiful thing. And I think some leaders just can't. Well, I don't call them leaders. I think they've been placed positionally outside of their capacity.
My experience has been that the best create the conditions for excellence, and they don't try to be excellent.
Absolutely. You just wrapped up that whole thing in one little line. I appreciate that.
No, I'm riding with you. This is great, because this all comes back to you and woo. That's your secret sauce, the magic power of winning others over. And that is understanding and meeting your audiences where they are, understanding their capabilities and their limitations, but playing to those strengths, not downplaying to what's limiting. So you're actually increasing the capacity and their ability to generate frequency. So I get it. Like, I'm tracking with you hard. And I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So here's the uncomfortable question that I'm dying to ask. In the political system, the political org, are there more narcissistic leaders, or are there more empowered leaders?
So now you're asking me to look inside to what we see today in government?
Your experience, not today. It can extend to today, but in your experience, because we were just discussing the distinction between, the distinction. So I'm curious, from your experience, are you finding the political aperture to be more rank and power and prestige, or are you finding more leaders that are curious, asking better questions, opening the aperture wider so that they're operating with inspiration and not creating desperation?
So I think my data is going to be skewed, because I mainly in my career, so I don't like the word career, but it'll help explain this a little better. I spent most of my time with warfighters. So, and then on top of that, under the SOCOM umbrella, and at units that screened. So you screen out against fit. So that's at least 6 years of my time. You're looking not just for skills, knowledge, and abilities, SKAs. You're looking for capacity, which we spoke of, but you're also looking for fit. You don't need two of the same person, so you might take the second best qualified, even though they're well qualified. And a lot of people don't understand the fit piece into these very functional and efficient units. But I don't know that there's anyone who can do an academic study on whether someone changes with rank and power, or someone finally lets their true colors show once they have rank and power. I always wondered that. I wondered which was happening when those weren't doing it well. And I usually can find the person that isn't there for the right reasons, or power is overtaken, is when you start surrounding yourself with people just like yourself. I believe that great leaders will maintain a healthy dissent somewhere in their earshot that will say, now my first CO, who went on to become the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and I'm brand new, green as can be, and he says, you and the Sergeant Major are the only two that can tell me the Emperor has no clothes, and I expect you to do that. And he was a full bird, Force Recon, infantry, Marine Corps colonel. And I'm right out of chaplain school, and I'm like, yeah, okay. But the very short time we had together, he invested in me. And I started to understand what that meant, both sides of the coin. Not just negative, it meant positive. It meant, hey, sir, ma'am, you need to go home. Your wife and kids are waiting for you. What you got on it, what you have can wait. We're home now. Or when's the last time you took a break? Or going to someone who is a little bit of a time thief and saying you need to yield back some time to the boss. They really need some space. So truth to power is just, everyone thinks that's a negative when it's so, again, if you're a trusted asset, a force multiplier the military likes to use, then they understand it's not about you. And that's where you never use your position to unpack something for yourself. That's selfish, and that is not part of speaking truth to power. That's asking for another appointment to say, hey, sir, ma'am, I'm having an issue. I need to talk to you as Robert, not as Chaps. You know, that's a different role, and we can go that way. But I saw danger when people would surround themselves by just like-minded people with no healthy dissent, no advisor, and when they thought they were better than what the precepts or instructions or rules would say about something. And but that exists everywhere. So I won't pick on the military, but that was my context in that aspect. I believe it exists everywhere in the human condition. And I believe people can grow from it when they finally get a voice that they might trust. And then I wonder how they unpack all the damage they might have caused over the years. I do know some who have spent their first few years of reflection and then reaching back to people they crushed. I give them credit. They've owned up to going back and trying to reconcile. And that's more in the chaplain leadership role sometimes, but line officers are the same. But again, my experience, I was around wonderful leaders, and I was in screened off areas. So if I didn't want someone to come in, I didn't have to, at least for 6 years. You know, if they were there for the wrong reason, I didn't have to let them in. So now my secret's out. Everyone, I hear that.
That I appreciate the strength for those that try to reconcile, because I believe we're all human.
Yes.
And I believe that we're all uniquely different, but still of one. And so how you carry yourself and treat others is a reflection to yourself as well. But I can't help but wonder, and not to be redundant, but the curiosity in me is, does power corrupt or does power enable the moral majority?
So again, I think it's what is in that person, yes, on whether that and where it goes, and are you ready for it? I tell you, one of my first bosses, it was just amazing. He would get his staff together and say, "Make me smart." He was not afraid to say that, and I was like, wow. And then you're a valued advisor and asset, and you're a part. There's this whole statement used to go around, especially sometimes when you're a chaplain, and depending on the chaplain you relieved, or the last chaplain, that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And when you walked in, if you didn't have a quiet role, either the last person was relegated to something else, or the leader didn't understand. It could be one or the other, and it wasn't mine to speculate, but it was to at least get back to the table. I don't have to have a prominent seat, but you need to be at the table, because part of our role was to be advisors and as chaplains. So
you're dropping all these fact bombs on me. If
no,
you're
I'm
not
sorry.
at the table, you're on the menu. I'm going to build a whole merch collection out for you, starting with woo, going to the menu and the table. It's going to be fabulous. You're going to be culturally relevant in another lane. All that shared. Robert, Chaps, I'd like to switch gears a little bit, and with your permission, I'd like to do a little theological wrestling if we can.
Absolutely.
Okay. So these are questions. They're not meant to be an ambush in any way whatsoever. But before we dive into it, where do you land on the tension between science and faith? And not the chaplain's answer, where does the honest belief live for you right now?
So I love that science carried out will lead to faith. And what I mean by that, if you take some of the greatest scientists that just continued with their hypothesis or formula, and they didn't stop, they didn't end at something, they found faith. just the recent astronauts. They may not be scientists, but their brain works in such ways that, they're like, you cannot look back at that little Earth suspended in nowhere and not know that there's something bigger than us. And the one who was on a naval ship, and he asked to speak to the chaplain. When the chaplain walked in, he broke into tears when he saw his cross. No one made that happen. That was what I call an existential experience where science met faith. So I like science. I believe that God created it, gave us minds, and I think when we use them, again, not to become famous, not to get something named after myself. Again, what is the motive? What is the motive behind your drive? I think we all want to make a difference. I don't believe I've met anyone who didn't want to make a difference in some aspect. But then we have to ask the second question: for what? What is that? For what? Is it for self? Because I see statues and buildings, but I can walk around D.C. and go, I don't know who that person is, but they have an entire park named after them. And so it made no eternal difference on that aspect. And I'm sure they did some amazing things. And they may not have intended that. I'm not saying that was their intention. That was just an honor. But the fact is, what drives us and our motivations, because if it's not, take the military, if it's not about rank and ribbons and medals, then you're going to do fine. And when time's over, it's over. And you go to a different context. And you don't have to figure out who you are because you lost a title, or a context. You still are who you are. And some warriors taught me that even early on when they would lose a limb. They lose their limb, they lost part of their body, then they lost the ability to do their job, though some have come back with prosthetics and deployed and done amazing things. So again, they didn't even lose their job in the long run. But when we're wrapped up in what we do so much and the accolades that come our way, if we get caught up in that, there's going to be a day of reckoning where we're sitting alone and going, what was it all for? And where do we make a difference at all?
That's the value of purpose.
Yes, sir.
And that leans back into the why. And that comes back to one's land nav, their spiritual nav, their presence.
Absolutely.
So these questions are going to lead to a progression, to a specific ask. And again, not trying to frag you here. I'm just trying to build a foundation to get us there. So I want to get to the God question with you. And I want to start by asking and sharing something that's in the news a lot now. And that is operators that are coming out of a psilocybin-assisted therapy describing a felt encounter with God after prayer had failed and after therapy had failed and after medication has also failed. So as a chaplain, what does that do to you, and what do you think of that context of the best spiritual guidance and the best man-made medicine is not able to help these individuals through their trauma, but a plant-based therapy is?
Yeah. So again, this leads into comparison is the thief of joy. So I can't compare my journey and how God met me and say that needs to work for you, or that needs to work for this operator. One of those operators of the two, I knew two of the three that did that documentary, and one of them I knew better, and he was a believer already. I also know of someone who was one of the roughest, probably meanest instructors for those who were trying to make it to DevGru. And then his experience was exactly what you explained. It wasn't anything that the VA could do. It wasn't anything that others could do. It was that time with this, the psychedelics, and where he met the transcendent. And he is a new person, totally. I mean, he fits the biblical, the old is gone, the new is here. And I can't explain why God would use certain journeys for different people, but I think God allows whatever we need to happen in order for us to understand. And so that is what those people needed. I also believe God created that plant. So I mean, that's another aspect, and it's been you. Again, we go back generations and generations and generations of a different culture that has known this. So I think the fear in American society is the unknown, and probably a few conspiracy theorists who says, "Oh, big pharma won't let us do this. This is much cheaper. We can just grow it, right?" And but the journey is the journey. So when I talk to the guys that have done that, that's what they needed. You know, one of the guys that was there, I was his chaplain, probably maybe had a few words in 3 years. He wasn't ready to engage in what we're doing right now, talking spiritual. But when the time was right, after he quit fighting, and I'm not talking combat now, I'm talking about fighting God's woo, which is bigger than mine, fighting God's woo, he wanted help, and he was open to healing. And this was the route that God used not only to heal, but to bring him into the transcendent. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I wrap my head around.
No, it does. And I appreciate that you brought up this historical provocation, because that's what I've been sitting on. And that's where I keep landing on, which is the indigenous people used the psilocybin mushrooms and peyote and ayahuasca, probably mispronounced it. But these are ceremonial sacraments thousands of years before Christianity arrived in the Americas. And I'm just curious about the spiritual interactions with the divine before colonization, before the church, before baptism, and what that does to the theological argument that salvation requires this specific sacrament.
So for me, I would push back and say the only stumbling block to salvation is surrendering to Christ. So baptism doesn't save. Helping 100-year-old ladies across the road isn't going to get me saved. The Lord's Supper, or the other terms we use for that, is a sacrament. Now, I help people cross roads. I take the Lord's Supper. I was baptized. Baptism is evidence of a faith change in my aspect. The Lord's Supper is not only the remembrance of what happened, but it says in hope of the return. And then I think the works that God in Scripture says he prepared works for us in advance. So works doesn't get you saved, but a true faith turns into a life lived that people would say is fruitful. And so when you use the word the sacrament, so what does that look like in indigenous people, or even the early local church? They met in homes and ate together. I'm talking about the one that was born out of the apostles right after Christ ascended, right? So that local church was not a big building with programs and salaries. And I wrestle with that still, and I'm a part of that. And I still wrestle with, like, is this, are we getting it right here in the Western culture? Because if I met in houses, look at the money that we could, and I think that's why social programs have come in and replaced some of the things that the church naturally had the helm on in the first place. And again, if I poke fingers, I'm a part of it. So that's, I'm going to be a part of that as well. That am I doing my part? Not because I have to earn anything, because I want to, out of who I am naturally. And I think that's a big difference. And it teaches you to rest as well. I'm not performing for someone else. If it's a season of rest, it's a season of rest, and your body needs that.
I experience you as an anomaly in the best way possible. In the best way possible. You're here to inform and not perform, and that's not semantics. There's a big difference there.
But I laugh because, and I'm surprised some of the people that you said you spoke to a few people. I get often called a unicorn, especially in the soft world. I didn't like that term at first. I'm not sure I still like it, because it puts you in a weird spot. But if it's who you are, that's who you are. And I heard a popular Christian song today. I'll build a boat. It's all about Noah and the ark, right? I'll build it. If God tells me to build a boat when there's no rain and there's no lake, and I'm like, we can sing those things, but when the rubber hits the road, will you stand alone if you're supposed to stand alone? I mean, Noah had to be a laughing stock in his time. It hadn't even rained yet, and he's building a boat. And so when we celebrate these things without deep thought, would we really stand alone if we had to? And that goes back to your earlier question, about truth and is it harder? I think it's harder and the damage larger to compromise. Both not just for the people we don't speak truth to, but for us who carry the fact that we had an opportunity to speak truth and we might have swallowed our whistle to say. So yeah, I've always taken that serious, and for the most part, it was received well in the military. So God protected me a lot.
For sure. And you're referencing back to that question of, is there a point where the truth becomes a burden rather than a liberator? Yes.
Yes. And well, there's a bunch of, that's like peeling an onion. There's a lot of layers there, and context, and who we speak truth to. Not everyone's ready. So you might have to delay and hit the right person, or not everyone's privy. It's kind of like, oh, you have a top secret clearance. That doesn't mean you get to know every top secret thing. There's a thing called need to know on top of it. So if you're not in that need to know, that's not part of your clearance, even though you have the same clearance, if that makes sense.
It does. So tell me something, chaps, not Robert, chaps, for this question. Why does the truth feel so heavy?
As I think through that, if there's a heaviness to truth, it's because you care so much for someone else. It's hard to watch someone self-destruct, right? It's hard to watch a train wreck in progress, and I'll go back to my hard leader at the White House. I mean, I don't think he was a bad person. I think he was a little bit of a weak leader, and he surrounded himself with stronger leaders who had bad intent with his name. But he ended up on the front of some paper, and I don't think he ever promoted after he left there. I don't celebrate that at all. And he was named on like so many of these things that had gone wrong, and I had spoken to him about 4 of those ahead of time. As the chaplain, I was like, no, we can't do it. You can't do this, and now when you're in those situations, that's confidence, right? So you can't say what those things are, but I mean to others. But I think I even told him one time, I don't like you, but I love you, and that was a big deal. But it was hard to watch that because I knew exactly where it was going, but I couldn't stop it, and I couldn't stop some of the things that were happening, some of his choices that were happening to other people. But I will say, those people landed well. I mean, amazingly well. And I was standing on I think it's 17th in Penn, and with a guy that was dismissed for no reason. I mean, he was a great leader. And while we were standing and he was lamenting, he got a phone call. He got promoted and he got a great job standing right there. And I was like, God's taking care of you. Do not look back. God is taking care of you. And now that doesn't, just because someone doesn't get something immediately doesn't mean God doesn't care or love. There's another lesson to learn. I can't explain why those things that are different. I just trust God's sovereignty and his plan, even though I can't see everything.
Well, I'm curious if an individual of that makeup, that nature, is going to understand the difference between like and love when you make a comment like, I don't like you, but I love you.
I think so. I think in this case, yes, because I survived, and he sat back in his chair. Because being at a special duty assignment, there's difference. So if I'm in a regular unit and I get in to be fired or whatever, because fired in the military means something totally different than fired in the secular world. But you have to have documentation, right? You have to prove it, so that if you're treated wrong, you have a say against your boss, right? In a
Right.
special duty unit like DevGru or White House, you screen to get there, and they can say bye anytime they want. And you can show up, and your badge won't work. And next thing you know, you turn in your credentials and your laptop and your phone, and you go work. For me, I'd have been at the Navy Yard. Not that everyone at the Navy Yard is there. That's where they would have put me because waiting for an assignment. By the way, the chaplains did the walkouts.
No.
Yes, because they knew we cared. It was so interesting. We got to collect the laptop and the cell phone and the badge, take it back to security as we walked them to their car. Yeah, so that was a very long walk sometimes for people, but they knew that we cared.
That's harsh. That sounds really harsh.
Yeah, so many people don't know. Well, it's so funny. The Chaplain Corps leadership thought I was over there, absolutely doing nothing. And it was the hardest job I ever had. They do now value the billet, which I'm happy for, but back then they didn't have a clue. And but that's another story for them.
Frequently, it's that way, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it takes a minute to understand, and then hopefully that institutional knowledge remains so that they can share it with others. And even if it's shared with others, who knows if they comprehend it.
Yes, sir.
Karma, that came to my mind. Speaking of the God intervening, I believe in that as well. So I appreciate that. I want to flip the script a little bit. I want to lean a little bit into nature, our creator, and frequencies, if we can. Do you believe in frequency, that what we emit and omit, we receive, interpret, and understand better? Are we in a constant signal exchange with everything around us?
So I'll answer the last part first. Yes, I believe we're in a constant interchange. I believe when we're aware and present that we now understand the frequency. Go back to Wu, right? So if you're winning others over and sometimes you're not even speaking, that is a frequency. I had a boss that could take over a room. If he walked in, it was a bad day, everyone wanted to be out. And he knew it, and we all knew it. It was a short staff meeting. But if he came in with a gleam in his eye and this sideways smile, we're like, oh, let's stay here forever and just be in his aura, because he was just such a fantastic leader. So I believe that. I believe that's how we understand the transcendent. So if you talk about prayer and worship being that, absolutely. I may not understand best how to explain the direct tie or correlation, but I do believe that. I mean, even in Romans it says, all humanity is without excuse because we can see it in creation, right? We can know there is something bigger just by all that's around us, and that's just the beginning of a journey.
So in that case, prayer is a frequency and worship's a frequency.
I believe, yes.
Okay.
I believe someone can pray and not understand. In fact, it may be a rote prayer. So go back to your sacrament question. Earlier, some would say if you do the Lord's Supper every time you get together, like some churches do, that it takes away the meaning. Well, that is on the individual, not on the institution. So if you correctly understand that is meaning, I could do it every day. It's meaningful. I mean, it is so meaningful, and that's a frequency thing, and not a frequency as in daily, but a frequency in a connection with the higher power. And therefore, when I even don't know how to pray, Scripture says that the Holy Spirit prays for me in my groans, who understands when I don't even know what to pray for or how, and that Jesus, as at the right hand of the Father, is an intercessor and prays for us. If you had that belief system, and we haven't talked about that yet, but if your belief system was that Jesus was the Savior and that he is praying for you, how overwhelming is that to think that right now I am being prayed for, even as I speak to you? And that's a frequency thing. That's where someone may take self-confidence, where I take abiding in connectivity.
Abiding in connectivity with Jesus praying for you is the overwatch.
Absolutely. Defender of my faith. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, understood. So then my question has to do with combat trauma.
Mm.
Is that a corrupted signal?
I think I don't want to sound judgmental because I'm not perfect at all and I have my own struggles. But I think from a chaplain standpoint, if you enter the combat arena thinking that you are God's spokesperson and he's going to bring everyone back home and no one's going to die, and then a Marine or a sailor, in my context, is killed in combat, then that becomes a beginning of a moral injury to where God is not performing up to my expectations. I hope you heard how that really sounded, because that's where,
Yes.
for me, I don't believe God owes me anything. I believe he blesses me. I mean, the fact that I'm speaking to you in my house with health, with owning a laptop. I mean, the next breath I took is a gift. So I think there's so much, but he owes me nothing. Someone says, is the cup half full or half empty? I'm happy to have a cup. God gave me a cup, and what he chooses to put in that and how I hold that cup is different. And so in combat, it's the same way. If you go in with these unrealistic expectations, it can throw you off into combat trauma. Now, trauma is real. Watching the buddy die is hard. And one of the hardest things I ever had to do with the SEAL is when we lose one down range and they take you to the main base to fly that body out through mortuary affairs. Even if it's like 3 hours after the death, someone has to identify that body. So you go in there with someone, and not that we're immune to it, but we're used to death. Most, I don't say most. In my circles, the understanding is death happens. But to see a body that's changed so much in just a few hours because of the conditions of where you are is stark. And I remember those young operators, their eyes would just go big because it's like, yeah, it doesn't look a lot like your friend anymore. And it's hard to see because you just escorted the body back. So trauma is real. And then how do you process that? And I think going back to your psychedelic question, I think especially operators, skilled unbelievably at compartmentalization. They'll pack it down, but you can only pack so much, and then your body throws up. So trauma is real. We need each other. I believe in the holistic approach of mind, body, spirit. I believe mental health providers bring so much to the table when they understand that as well. And I believe in processing together. God created us in community. We need each other to process. I think the World War II generation, I got to speak on a ship cruise. It was a neat thing in Europe. And the World War II generation was there, and they're like, how come my dad, my uncle, my brother did not talk like you guys talk about combat? And I said, the difference, I believe, they were all drafted. They were gone. Communication wasn't as good. And when they came back, they disbanded and went back to work. And if there were no other veterans in their town or with the same experience, they have no one to unpack with. We are now units coming back, unpacking together, shared stories, shared issues, shared traumas, and so we get a chance to pack. The closest thing we had to the kind of World War II generation is what we did to our reserve and guard units for a while. We would deploy them, bring them home, and shoot them back out all over where they lived, so they didn't have that time. I hope we're doing a better job with them because they're amazing. They're amazing human beings as well.
Yes. And the concept of process is very
Yes, sir.
important to me. But
Yes, sir.
before I lean into your process, may I share some feedback?
Absolutely.
You impress me as one that is fulfilled, that is satisfied, and that is nourished. And I don't use those three words with many people at the same time. And it is resonating loudly through this conversation. And I hope the gravity of that is reaching the audience as well.
Well, thank you for that. But I want to tell you why you feel that is because we're having that dialogue. We're in that. And I believe that what we're doing today has a purpose. And if one person picks up something out of this time that you and I have together, then every second was well worth it. And so I find great meaning and purpose in that. So yes, there's aspects that will show up, especially while engaged like this.
Robert, to process, there's the conventional mental model. People like things that are linear, they like labels, they want to learn how to deploy and use it for the betterment, one would hope. And there was a framework that you dropped on me that I took notes on during your intake call. I call it Robert's 5-step process. That's the branding side.
Can't wait to hear it.
I'm going to walk you through it. Correct me if I've got it wrong, but what I'd like you to do is take a moment when we get to the number 5 and sort of articulate what it's about. You said, hey, Miles, I have a framework for caring for others. It starts with care. It goes to connection, to facilitation, to provision, and to advisement.
Okay. So that actually, connection was kind of who I am and wired in that. That's the 4 core capabilities for the Naval Chaplain Corps, actually. We care for all, regardless of what they believe or don't believe. We provide for those of our own faith. So if you're in my unit and you want to get married, or your child needs to be baptized and you're not part of a local church at that point, we can do what we need to do to make that happen. But what if you're not my flavor of the day, right? And so that's facilitate. My job is to then love you enough to say, I will help you with that and find someone for you. And then advisement is they talk about strategic advisement and all kinds of things. But really, I just call it at every level of leadership, the lowest level. So in the Marine Corps, that's a fire team, if you can, right? All the way to the boss. And I believe wisdom says, fix it at the lowest level as you can. Now, as a chaplain, sometimes you come in with some rank and they're like, you can't go in tasking. You go in and explore with them so that they can see the picture and they go, oh, I get it. I need to do this. It's because you care. It's not about me being right. It's about getting them to where they can be and need to be for what it, in a black and white situation. In a kind of a gray situation, it's how you do that. But so I'd have to say that 4 core capabilities come out of the Naval Chaplain Corps. I think you still operate. In fact, if they would just, speaking to my Corps now, if they would just get great at those 4 things and quit trying to do these legacy, I'm the top dog and I'm gonna build a legacy. Just do the job well. There's enough work out there.
I have no doubt that they're doing it well, and it's a job that is being done with purpose. So thank you for that. You give me a lot to think about. I'm hitting a hard pause. Let's fast forward to today. Let's talk for a moment about frequency and the speed of today's world. Let's talk about brain-machine interfaces, Neuralink, silicon wired to a neuron. Where does the soul live in the person's body with all this technology and machine stuff happening?
Wow, it's that's a huge area that I'm grateful that there are very wise people working in, especially on the ethical aspect as well. I had a chaplain that I supervised in my last assignment, and he wrote that's his doctoral work. He's writing on it right now, and he's amazing. Amazing young man, still very young. But there's value in that stuff, but it cannot replace the human condition. I think people are finding that out, even with a simple task of going to McDonald's and finding nobody at the cash register and how to work a machine. I don't think people are thinking that they're being replaced when they actually possibly could. But the bigger threat is replacing our thinking. Even with those things you mentioned, which are way above my understanding in some aspects, but the ability to just scroll and AI or chat GPT, write my paper, whatever, the critical thinking that humans need and the connective interaction that we need is not happening at the level that it normally is. Even in academia, in some spots, it's become a soapbox, repeat these talking points after me, instead of saying, how can I make you question and think and defend and research your point of view? and dialogue with respect and with other people, because it's not about being right. It's about educating and bringing, like you said, the room to a higher level. And I think that's where I think we're in a dangerous spot there if we're not careful. As I talk to younger kids, but at the same time, I see even a draw from some of the younger generation away from that. They want the authentic. They want the transparent. They're looking for the real, because that will not satisfy. So which side wins out on that one? In society, uh, my I would just pray a lot and get some frequency going on that aspect, and then love and not judge. You know, it's easy to look over at a table and four people are sitting and they're all on their phones, and you want to go stop. It's a little bit of a judgment, but I think that's where you said that, you know, where the truth is a burden, is because you actually love and you see that and you're like, they're missing out on so much, you know, but just by dialoguing day to day with each other, and surpassing this stuff. I mean, I even get to is like, I don't know what that is. What's Google say, right? I go right to Google and say,
sure.
I mean, I fix lawn equipment sometimes that way. It's like, hey, um, so I'm not reading a tech manual anymore either. So is that dangerous? It could be. I know the Navy had to face that for a little while when they were pushing people through tech school quicker. They were great operators of the equipment, but they couldn't fix a repair. So they went back to the older generation, who now became civilians, stationed at these big ship places, and would fly them out to fix, because these kids didn't know that. And that's the system thought it was smarter than it was at the time. And prayerfully, they've gone back to teaching tech manuals. And every pilot knows how to fix a plane. I guarantee they're still doing that. Those poor pilot students, you would see them in the hallways memorizing everything. I mean, if they're flying in the United States military, they've put a lot of time into some books.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I had Kim K.C. Campbell on, and her life was saved by knowing how to fly a plane through the wires when she lost critical aviation components.
Because they know it. They have to know their platform. See, I'm glad we segued to. I use the word, they know their platform. Do we know our platform? We're all in a platform somewhere, but the greatest, and Soft says this, the priority is the operator. That's your weapon system. The number one weapon system is the human being, and that's why she was able to do what she was, because she could think critically and she was prepared in advance to take that.
And I appreciate those organizations that are keeping a human in the loop in the AI revolution. My overriding concern is that whatever can be monetized is going to win the war, the proverbial war. And my sensibility is that there's an attack on humanists today, that je ne sais quoi that happens when you and I just spitball ideas and aren't distracted with Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT, and we're just getting after it. And that's fun. And that's where some of the greatest unlocks happen. Karma, serendipity, whatever that great word is that pulls it together. But that's one thing that I question and I wonder about. I can say with great emphasis, and I don't say things with an exclamation point often, but AI will never replace empathy.
No, it can't feel.
And if it can't feel, it can't comfort. It can advise, but it cannot comfort. And so that which you do is going to be job security forever.
Well, interesting though. I have a really good friend whose adult daughter was killed in a car accident, and the beginning of his care became through AI counseling. And now he didn't stop there, because after a while it picks up algorithms and will tell you what you what you kind of want to hear. That's the danger. I have a Gold Star mom who actually is an engineer and helped teach AI, if that makes sense. She started telling me about it and my brain fried, so I didn't understand anything after that.
Robert, if someone in the audience listening would like to speak with you for consultation, collaboration, spiritual guidance, How would you like one to connect with you?
They can just email me personally, and it would be helpful if they just put in the subject line fight or flight, so I know where the context is coming from. And then I'll get back to them. And that's my last name, Bradshaw. Robert 1776 at Gmail.
Closing question for you, Robert. We're known by the company we keep. Yours is beyond reproach. It's also been said that the most lasting impact a person has is by what others say about him. What will others say about you, and how do you want to be best known?
Yeah, I don't know what others would say other than some of the things you said. And I had a wonderful retirement ceremony that kind of blew me away. It started off as a barbecue idea that went way beyond that. And but I would hope they say that I was authentic, transparent, and that I loved and loved well.
Loved and loved well. And I add to that, lived a full life and a life worth living.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robert Bradshaw, this is everything the show is built for. It's been real. It's been unfiltered. Thank you for trusting us with your story. Friends, family, and cohorts, please find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Everyone out there, walk worthy. Rob, you referred Robert Bradshaw to this podcast. You know this man. What do you want people to know about Chaps that my conversation with him may not have reached?
I think when people meet Robert Bradshaw, they see a man who can seem gentle, can seem introspective, and if they know he's a chaplain, if they know him as Chaps, they may equate being a chaplain to being supportive on the softer side of, soft power kind of business. But this is a hard man and a deep man. I work closely with Chaps Bradshaw at the White House, and we saw him as an essential advisor, a barometer and a thermometer of the organization. That is leadership, not at a directive level, but at an advisory level, at a council level. And I saw him walk into leaders, including myself, and ask this really simple question: "Hey, sir, what did you intend out of that decision? What did you want to accomplish?" And you tell him, and then he'd say, "Yeah, that didn't happen. This is what people see, or this is what the effect is. Maybe you want to reconsider." And it wasn't harsh, but it was hard. And he never backed down. He never backed away. And it's funny, we have that capability in the military. We have a chaplain corps that is more than just religious support. They're part of the leadership team. So to me, that's what Robert Bradshaw is he is an extension, a powerful extension of a senior leader's capabilities, their impact. He's just the best advisor and friend. He becomes not only a coworker, but a friend to people that he shepherds. And that shepherding, not just in a religious sense, to every religion that someone might offer up to him, but shepherding in a human sense. He's a guide and a friend and a mentor to people who outrank him, to have more power than him. That's a unique skill and capability. He generates love, man.